progress that we've made and the work that remains, and the role that each and every one of us plays to making that a part of our future. It is through these conversations that we continue to honor the spirit of those who have led and inspired the civil rights movements and those who continue to shape it today. So thank you again for being here and for joining us this evening of learning and inspiration. It is now my pleasure to introduce Chris Marsh, chair of this year's Global Summit, who will introduce tonight's event's sponsor.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Gerald. And we appreciate Gannon's ongoing commitment to making Erie a better place, a more vibrant place. And we see that not just through the students and the education, but certainly to the commitment that Gannon has made to your surrounding neighbors and neighborhoods. So thank you for that. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the Jefferson Educational Society, its board of directors, the JES team, and the Legion of Volunteers, welcome to the 15th event of the 2025 Global Summit Speaker Series. For those of you I haven't met, I'm Chris Marsh, and I'm honored to be the chairwoman of this year's Global Summit. It was in my last role at Erie Insurance that I've had the opportunity to work more closely with Ferky and his team over the past decade, and each year I more fully appreciate Ferky's vision for not only opening up timely topics for us here in Erie, but to bring global perspectives and bring global leaders here to our hometown so that others get to know what a gem Erie, Pennsylvania is as well. So we appreciate that. I thank Ferky for your unwavering vision into the future and where we are today, and certainly to his team who has been successful in helping to execute it. So a round of applause, please, for Jefferson. Tonight, I can't wait to learn from Juan Williams, a thoughtful and engaging journalist, political analyst, and writer who will talk about his latest book, New Prize for These Eyes, The Rise of America's Second Civil Rights Movement. But before I turn things over to tonight's event sponsor to more formally introduce our speaker, I do have a couple of housekeeping notes for us. First, on your way through, hopefully you received an index card and a golf pencil that will help you write down your questions. JES team members will be around to collect them and be sure that they are passed on to Steve Scully, who is moderating tonight's discussion. Steve, as you may know, is the JES's director of the Brock Institute and senior advisor for strategic development. And I'd be remiss not to give Steve a shout out, not just for the work that he does this year, but certainly for the work that he has done over the years on behalf of our community in the Jefferson. So thank you, Steve. We do have two remaining events to close out this year's summit. I'll mention them briefly. First, the medium is the message, media's impact on national politics, featuring political analyst, best-selling author, and founder at the University of Virginia's Center for Politics, where he leads Sabado's Crystal Ball, Larry Sabato. This will be hosted right at the Jefferson at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. After a short break for the holiday, we will welcome renowned award-winning filmmaker, literary scholar, and institution builder, Henry Louis Gates Jr., host of Discovering Your Roots, for a special event on Thursday, December 4th at the Warner Theater. I hope to see you all there. Now, to introduce tonight's guests, I'd like to welcome to the stage someone from another organization in our community who is also doing transformational work to build a brighter tomorrow for Erie today, who has been a part of the Global Summit and the organization that is tonight's event sponsor, Vice President of External Affairs for the Lake Erie College of Osteopathic Medicine, otherwise known as LECOM. Please help me welcome Monsignor David Rubino. Father Rubino.
Thank you. The only reason I'm here is Ferky told me I had to be here. And when Ferky says you have to be somewhere, you do exactly what he says or you get yourself in trouble. So Ferky, where are you? Where is Ferky? Where'd he go? Where are you? Oh, there you are. Thank you for inviting me. And thank you all for coming out tonight. Juan Williams is a veteran journalist, political analyst, and author. He's been a prominent voice for years on issues of race, politics, and American democracy. He began his career at the Washington Post, covering politics and civil rights for more than 2 decades. He also worked for years at PBS and Fox News. Among his many honors, he earned an Emmy Award for television documentary writing. His latest book, New Prize for These Eyes, The Rise of America's Civil Rights Movement, is the subject of tonight's program, and reflects on a historic new moment and new heroes in our life as a country. As Juan explained in a PBS interview in January, in this moment of time, in the wake of the George Floyd killing and the Black Lives Matter movement, I thought there's a lot going on here that people don't think of as a civil rights movement. And this movement that we're currently in is distinct from the first civil rights movement of the 1960s. It's all about not passing simply legislation, but about people gaining voice and saying, this is what it's like to be Black, to be Latino, to be a woman in this age. And it's challenging, he says, the way we think about America, because these people are now having their own voice. It's a new conversation, it's a new movement, and I would add it's a necessary conversation. So please give a warm Global Summit welcome to a good conversation he will lead tonight, political analyst and author Juan Williams, and our very own, who is with us all the time, the immutable, the wonderful Steve Scully. Thanks, Juan. Thoughts?
Bishop Rubino, thank you very much for that. We appreciate it. Do we have an announcement? Juan, welcome to Erie.
Thank you. Pleasure.
You've had the chance to see the city a little bit. The weather's cooperating. Presque Isle Bay. What do you think?
Are they gulls?
Seagulls.
Seagulls. What beauty. And then I missed sunset, but someone showed me a picture. It was gorgeous. Yeah.
Well, we welcome you. The way we're going to frame our discussion, we're going to talk about the second civil rights movement, but of course, we have to better understand the first civil rights movement as well. So we're going to kind of weave back and forth between where we are today, where we're heading, and how we got here. Let me remind you that we will take your questions. Also remind you that we will have a book sale and signing afterwards. The books you pay for, the signing is free, but that will be right over there, and we'll direct you for that. It's an excellent book. And as I'm rereading it last night, I was talking to Jacob, and I thought I had to bring in some of the video that brings this book to life. But let's talk about where we are today and how we got to this point. You begin the book by talking about Barack Obama. He was here 2 months ago, and I asked him about that speech in 2004. So why don't we roll that video, and then we'll get into the conversation. Photo number 2, 21 years ago, Boston, and your speech about not a red America, not a blue America, but a red, white, and blue America. How did that come about? Nice tie, by the way.
Yeah. Look, I just look so young. Sometimes I'm shocked that anybody voted for me. It's like, look at that baby. No, I had been campaigning. I wasn't even a U.S. Senator at the time. I was a state legislator. But I'd been campaigning for the U.S. Senate, and I had won the nomination. And I had traveled all across Illinois. And Illinois, like Pennsylvania to a large degree, it's a microcosm of the country, right? There are big cities, but there are also rural areas and suburbs, and you got every kind of group of people, and so traveling around the state and just being in conversations with people at VFW halls and Friday night football games and county fairs, you get a sense of who we are. And I deeply believed, and I still do, that we're less divided than our politics would indicate.
Every point to this book is Barack Obama, 2004, the keynote address in Boston. I was there. It was electric. He was not the first choice. So give us the backstory of how that led to his rise and ultimately the presidency.
So if you'll remember, Steve, but let me just first say thank you all for coming out tonight. I sincerely appreciate your presence, and it's a thrill for me to be in Erie. When I was introduced, it was said that my first job in journalism was in Washington at the Washington Post. Actually, it was in Philadelphia at a newspaper now long gone, the Philadelphia Evening Bulletin. We don't have afternoon papers in America anymore, but that was the biggest paper in Philadelphia 50 years ago when I was a student at Haverford College and working as an intern at the Bulletin. And I remember having to make trips here, and so it's a pleasure. I must say the whole Bayfront is a different place. It's beautiful. And hats off to the Global Summit, because the idea of bringing in conversation, I just think it's so wonderful, especially in this moment when too many people can get locked into, and guess who you're hearing this from, get locked into your TV sets, all right? So to get out and to hear different voices and engage with different people and different points of view, to me, is just so healthy and such a tonic in a time of polarization and alienation. When I hear about people who are talking to artificial intelligence, I think, come on, get a friend. Go out and talk to somebody. How ridiculous is this? So thank you, and thank you to Gannon for having us here tonight, Steve. Always a pleasure to be with you. I've known Steve for a long time. I've known your sister from the Kennedys.
A Gannon grad.
A Gannon grad, look at that. So there you go. When I think about this book, New Prize for These Eyes, I have to go back 40 years, almost 40 years, to when I wrote a book called Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Years. That book was a companion volume to a PBS series of the same name, and even tonight as I was coming in, people were saying, I saw Eyes on the Prize when I was a kid, when I was in school and the like. And I thank people who, again, were watching. And that book, that TV series, told the story of the first civil rights movement, the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century. And so what you're getting there is the story of America at a moment when people are battling laws of segregation, when it was the law that people sit on separate sides of the room or in separate rooms, when it was the law that prohibited people. I mean, it's hard to make real to the students here today, but, that blacks and whites weren't allowed to swim in the same pool, or that you have sort of historical artifacts like a colored water fountain or a white water fountain. You think, what is that? Is that real? Or did someone make that up? It sounds so fictional. It sounds like, you're making up something just to be dramatic, but that was the reality. And so you get a situation where in that period, you have most famously Dr. King, but also people like Thurgood Marshall, the NAACP lawyer, battling against laws requiring racial segregation. And then in 1964, you get passage of the Civil Rights Act. And then in 1965, passage of the Voting Rights Act. When I was talking about segregated facilities, you should also know there was great segregation in terms of the right to vote. Who had the right to vote in America, to be a participant in our very essential body politic? So this is the heart and soul of the first civil rights movement, mid-20th century. Then you fast forward and we come to here, this moment today. And I think there's a second movement going on. Why do I say a second movement? Most people I talk with say to me, but no, it's just this first movement continues. We've gone through different epochs of change and development. But in fact, what I said to you about the first movement, stop and think for a second. Passage of a Voting Rights Act as the supreme goal of that first movement was all about getting Black people in a position where they could vote for their elected representatives, and some of those representatives therefore might reflect the interests and concerns of Black people. And some of them might be Black people, and one day, in the fantasy beyond the realm of dreams, there might be a Black president. Well, it happened. America has had a Black president. You know this because he was on this stage, 2 weeks ago, he's there.
2 months.
2 months ago. And that really was the fulfillment of the first civil rights movement. And when you have a Black president, it comes loaded with so much meaning given the history, given the past, given that first movement. Now, as Steve was telling you, in this book, I argue that the first movement really comes to an end, and the second to a beginning was Barack Obama's speech to the Democratic National Convention in Boston in 2004. Just to help you have some context for this moment, before I discuss the speech, you have to understand that the Democratic nominee is John Kerry, from Massachusetts, born to great wealth, and he is there now going up against the second President Bush after 9/11. He is not favored. He's really having to deal not only with 9/11, but the war in Afghanistan, war in Iraq. And in this moment, there is great pressure on him to deliver something of a repudiation of the war, and even to make the case that there's lack of attention to so many issues that are dividing the country. He is looking to maximize the Black vote. And he finds that given his aristocratic background, his sort of elite Massachusetts roots, he doesn't have much support in the Black community. Initially, the speaker for prime time at the convention, the keynote for that night, was supposed to be Jennifer Granholm, the governor of Michigan. And the reason was that he wanted to reach into the female vote. And the idea was Jennifer Granholm was going to be featured on America's TVs at the convention and say American women can relate to this guy, that she is speaking of their concerns. But just a few weeks before the convention, Kerry had the opportunity to campaign with a young Black man in Chicago who was then running for U.S. Senate, Barack Obama. And Obama made an impression on Kerry because he was so outstanding in terms of his dealings with the business community in Chicago. And Kerry gets the idea that, well, maybe this could be a little different. Maybe this is a way to appeal to the Black community by having a Black speaker and a younger Black speaker, not a Jesse Jackson, who I just want to note, as you had mentioned to me, is in the hospital tonight in pretty bad shape. But a different kind of Black speaker, this younger, more forward-looking rather than looking back to some of the first civil rights, but someone looking forward. And so he decides on Barack Obama as that keynote speaker. Now to the speech. You were there. I was there. And I must tell you, I was surrounded by Jesse Jackson and some other very prominent people in a suite I had walked into this suite. I wasn't supposed to be there, but if you know me, you know I can be obnoxious. So I just walked in and, was taking advantage of this to try to get some color from my story. And there was chatter. People are talking. Nobody knows who this guy is. In fact, there was a headline that said, "Who is this guy? Who are they putting up there tonight? How's he going to grab anyone's attention?" One of his advisors had said that Barack Obama is a guy with no chance, no money, and a funny name. That's what people thought. He was a state senator, and it looked at this point as if he was a good shot to win the U.S. Senate seat from Illinois, because the Republican candidates had fallen into scandal. But basically, in terms of Black America, much less white America, and even in the political world, he was an unknown. It's shocking to go back, but that's the reality. And he starts to speak. Dick Durbin, U.S. Senator retiring from Illinois, introduces him. And Obama begins talking about, the land of Lincoln, and talks about Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence, and all men are created equal. And the chatter and the noise in the room is almost deafening. You can't pick up, what is this guy talking about? But as he talks, something starts to happen. And that something catches the attention of the room, and suddenly people are listening. He talks about his dad being from Africa and an immigrant. He talks about his mom as a white woman from Kansas. And he talks about the idea that he is even standing on this stage as something that could only happen in America. He talks about his name. People would make fun of his name. Obama, like Alabama or something. People had all kinds of funny, and he says, no, people don't know it, but Barack means blessing. Blessing. And it's a blessing for me to be in a country where having a strange name doesn't mean that I can't get a good education, that I can't be a success, that I can't have a family, that I can't be respected and loved. And the room is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. We don't hear Black men in America, especially Black political leaders, speaking in this way about America. That historically, the message from Black men and Black political leaders, think Jesse Jackson, has been that America owes a debt, an unpaid debt, to Black America for the injustices, for the deprivation that has taken place. No, here is someone who is saying, to the contrary, I am grateful to be an American. I am blessed to be an American. And in this moment, I want you to know that I believe deeply in what Jefferson has said about the promise, the idealism of equality. And he talks about something that I think all of you will know from later hearing about Obama. He talks about the audacity of hope. Can you imagine the audacity of hope coming from a Black man talking to a national audience at a national convention? And then famously, he says, you know what? We are not a liberal or a conservative America. We're not a white America and a Black America. We're not a Latino America and Asian America. We're the United States of America. Oh my God. Now the room is silent. Everyone's listening. We haven't heard this message. We haven't heard anything like this that gives us a vision for an optimistic, positive view of race in America. The place erupts, if you'll recall. And I was like, wow, who's this guy? What a moment. And it almost automatically, there then was conversation about, and something you may again have heard, a post-racial America. Mm-hmm. For the first time now, people are talking about maybe we're in a new era of race relations in this country. And of course, he goes on to become the first African American president. I always recall the poster of him that's so famous. Essentially, he looks like angelic. He's covered in rainbow stripes above his head, and below it just says hope. This was a very positive, optimistic, and what's striking to me as a journalist and as an author is that it was a break with a lot of the negativity, a lot of the sullen, sort of grievance-based argument about race in America. And I think it lifted spirits and opened the door to new conversations. And of course, that's obvious with his having won the presidency twice.
How many of you were there the night with Barack Obama? So you all can attest to what he brought to the stage and what a tribute that he came to Erie. So, Juan, before we continue with the second civil rights movement, let's talk about how we got to this point. I want to forewarn you that you're going to see some pictures that you might find abhorrent, because if you know the story of Emmett Till, you know what happened. But I think it's important to understand a significant moment in the first civil rights movement, and this is a portion of his story. Let's watch.
The shockingly violent murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till in the summer of 1955 was one of the most painful moments in the history of American race relations. It was also a key turning point for the modern civil rights movement, using the mass media to galvanize protests to demand the end of Jim Crow segregation and equality before the law. The decision to publish the unvarnished photograph of her son's brutally battered head and face was made by one courageous person, Emmett Till's grieving mother, Mamie Till Mobley.
Emmett Till was the 14-year-old black boy from Chicago who was lynched by white supremacists in Money, Mississippi on August 28, 1955. Emmett Till's body was recovered from the Tallahatchie River with a 125-pound cotton gin fan belt tied around his neck.
Chris, take me back to September 3rd, 1955.
Well, it was the beginning of 4 days of process of viewing the body of Emmett Till, and we estimate something like 100,000 people came to view his body in an open casket that his mother had designed.
She allowed the press to photograph his body, and those photographs were published in Jet magazine. Her decision to open the casket, to allow those gruesome photographs to be published, served as a catalyst for the next phase of the civil rights movement.
What we saw in the mutilated remains of Emmett Till caused a death of innocence of this country. We had to realize, as Mamie Till Mobley expresses, that there were no more innocent bystanders. We all had to take responsibility and become active in turning things around.
What effect did this have on Mamie?
Well, she was devastated, but was able to mine her grief for a mission.
If the death of my son can mean something to the other unfortunate people all over the world, then for him to have died a hero would mean more to me than for him just to have died.
It's a story that still has resonance today. As we see, the name Emmett Till is raised every time another black male is taken down in an act of violence by a white perpetrator, even a white authority figure who gets away with it.
Although Emmett's murderers walked free, Mamie Till Mobley's prescient use of the media was a dramatic turning point in the movement. Just a few months later, Rosa Parks would refuse to move from her seat on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama, launching the modern civil rights movement.
Of course, one more recently, we see Trayvon Martin and, of course, George Floyd. That, of course, was Henry Louis Gates, who's going to be at the Warner Theater, so join us in early December. But you write about that in your first book. That was truly one of the pivotal moments in the first civil rights movement. Why?
Well, you have to, again, put it in some context. Remember, 1954 is Brown versus Board of Education, the, in cliche, landmark Supreme Court ruling that said that segregation in public schools is unconstitutional and that the damage done cannot be remedied, and that this had to be undone. You have to stop having segregated schools. Of course, there would be massive resistance to that ruling. It wouldn't take much effect for years. But what you get in that moment is, again, a ray of hope in terms of change. Now, remember, as I've described it to you, that first movement really is about battling the laws of segregation. And school segregation stands out here. And then comes Emmett Till. And when Emmett Till happens, it's subsequently followed by what you just saw there with Rosa Parks, and Rosa Parks saying that as she is refusing to give up her seat on the bus, she's thinking about what happened to Emmett Till. And then you get a number of young people in America's colleges and universities, black and white, who then begin to participate in student activities to protest segregation, famously the Freedom Rides. And so many of them, for them, Emmett Till was a disquieting eye-opener. It was like, oh my God, he was my age. He was someone I could relate to, or someone I might have known. And I think Steve warned you about the video, the pictures, but you have to understand that Mamie Bradley's decision to put the picture in Jet, it's the most famous picture ever published in Jet magazine, really, I think, again, it didn't just shock the black readers of Jet magazine. I think it had a profound, troubling impact on young people who heard about the idea that a kid who supposedly had said, "Hey, baby," or whistled at a white woman, a kid, would be then dragged from his granduncle's house in the middle of the night, taken to a barn, beaten, and when he refused to say that he had done anything wrong, beaten so badly as to gouge out his eye, shot in the head, and then taken down to the Tallahatchie River, and his body is thrown into the river. And it was only because of the cotton gin getting caught up on some branches that people saw the body, and that the sheriff had no choice but then to go and say, well, we got to get this body that was then in the hot Mississippi sun, blowing up. It was that kind of drama that then is exacerbated by a trial in which the two men who committed this horrific murder are found not guilty by an all-white jury, all-white, all-male jury. And this is national news. And again, this is like, imagine a drum beat, imagine a vibration, imagine social media. We live in a social media age, but imagine when I say vibration, that it's not social media sensation that causes people to be aware of this. It is people telling other people about their sadness, about the harm, about the idea that this is a 14-year-old boy and that he was beaten and mutilated. And suddenly it sounds like a horror movie. And you think, wait a second, I'm in this horror movie. I can say something. I can do something. So for a lot of people, it was a transformative event. Now, I think the reason that you mention this is that, to my mind, we are in a second movement, and so many people, I think, identify it under the term Black Lives Matter. And of course, they associate it with George Floyd's murder in 2020 under the knee of the...
on video.
I'm sorry?
Caught on video. I mean, we watched the murder.
Video, right. And so the idea of social media here with George Floyd is explicit because it's on video. A young woman pulls out her cell phone and tapes the 9.5 minutes that the policeman has his knee on Floyd's neck. But it also comes And the reason that we associate it with the term BLM, Black Lives Matter, is because you had the Trayvon Martin situation that preceded it. And again, the social media plays such an important role because you have the Martin murder takes place in Florida, but you have 3 women out in California who are aware of it. And when the security guard, volunteer guard, who shot Trayvon Martin is acquitted, they are online and seeing people say, well, he was walking around in a hoodie. You know how these kids are, they can look threatening, and why was he out and why was he walking in the rain? And one of them, I think it was Patrice Cullors, says, wait a minute, why are black people talking about this kid in this way? I don't care if he had a hoodie on. I don't care if his pants are hanging down. Black lives matter. And he was a child. He had just gone to the corner store and gotten iced tea and some Skittles. And you're telling me that somebody who challenged him for no reason and then shoots him is being acquitted. Black lives matter. And again, the media is so important because it doesn't just stay in Florida. It doesn't even just stay in California. It then becomes not only a national, but an international issue. How the police deal with black youth. And, you mentioned Henry Louis Gates, and we know about Henry Louis Gates and the policeman going back, I think that's 2009, because that also ends up in Barack Obama's
Beer Summit.
The Beer Summit. But then you think about it going forward. In 2014, you had a man, Eric Garner, in Staten Island, New York, who was selling loose cigarettes, and he ends up, he was asthmatic and had a heart, but the police choke him and he dies. I'm trying to think, there's so many cases. The one that I start this book with also was in 2014. That was Michael Brown in Ferguson, where he gets shot and his body is left in the street, and then there's a bunch of rioting, and it puts Barack Obama on the spot because now you have a black president, and the question is, should the black president go and try to resolve or quiet the rage on the streets of Ferguson? And it goes beyond. I mean, you have Laquan McDonald in Chicago, Philando Castile in Minneapolis, and then you have George Floyd. And this, it kind of like is pulling back a scab with regard not only to police brutality, but to the fact that there is a disproportionate amount of incarceration of black and Latino men in this country. I think it's been found that over the last 40 years, it's close to 30% of the men who have been executed in the country are black. Well, that's, black population is about 13%. So it's disproportionate. And this reality then becomes one of the themes of this second civil rights movement, something not dealt with in the first movement. But again, relationship between police, black people, and the element of crime or suspicion. You may have heard about the stop and frisk controversy in New York. This has so many faces. It's so many ways. But it's not only that. It's about the lived experience. People talking about bad schools, about the inferior quality of schools. I referenced in the first movement, Brown v. Board of Education, and the Supreme Court saying that segregation is illegal. But you have to realize that today more than half of black and Latino students in this country go to what we call hyper-segregated schools, schools that are 90% black and Latino. And those schools have a disproportionate truancy rate, failure rate, sadly, people just quitting school. This is an ongoing issue in America. This is something not addressed at all. Again, first movement was about ending segregation in schools. Now we are dealing with the inequality in terms of education offered to American children. Then we could talk about housing, we can talk about income inequality. And in this moment, with President Trump in office, you also have to talk about the idea of where race should be allowed in terms of American conversation. Is it legitimate to talk about race in terms of admissions to school? Is it legitimate to talk about race when it comes to hiring? What about, is it legitimate to talk about race in the classroom? It might hurt some little kid's feelings to hear about the horrors of slavery or the horrors of an Emmett Till. And President Trump has said, it's depressing. Why do we need to talk about it? President Trump has said that BLM, Black Lives Matter, is a hate symbol. So suddenly, it's political as well as a matter of history, but it's also a second movement. And that's what I wanted. That's the reason I wrote this book, Steve. I wanted people to appreciate that even as we think back to Dr. King, we think back to Rosa Parks, and we say these were landmark, iconic movements in terms of our American history. I think it's also so important that we understand that we are in the midst of a second movement. We are living through this moment, and that all of us appreciate our standing as historic figures in this moment. One of the things that's so hard to communicate to people is it's such a different country, not just in terms of media and the way we talk to each other and communicate, but in terms of the racial dynamics and demographics. That when I was a kid, this was a 90% white country. As we sit here today, it's a 60% white country. As we sit here today, blacks are no longer the major minority group in the country. That's Latinos. And of course, as we sit here, the fastest growing minority in the country is Asian. This is a different country with different voices and different people who have the opportunity to speak up about the way they experience life in America. And I think that on the other side, you have people, some might say the exact opposite of Black Lives Matter is MAGA, Make America Great Again. People who talk about Confederate monuments, who talk about the idea that really, to be white in America, some people argue, is to experience a greater level of racial discrimination than black people. That everything now is being given to black people, but not to white people. You think, wow, this is an amazing point of view. But this is a real point of view when you understand why there is political power to saying we have to stop diversity efforts in this country. And I think you should take a moment to appreciate what's going on here at Gannon, where that hasn't been the case, where there's a continuation of efforts to open doors. So to me, this is second movement. And this is understanding who we are and where we are in terms of American history, that we're not just reading history, but in this moment, we're making history.
So with that, let me just put into context two other moments that give us a better understanding of where we are today. Let me set the stage for this next piece of film that you're about to see, because Dr. King delivered the I Have a Dream speech in late August 1963. 2 weeks later, in a Sunday in September in Birmingham, Alabama, 4 young girls in the washroom, in the powder room, putting makeup on. They were excited to go to Sunday school and to church, and this happened.
18 days after the March on Washington, Birmingham, Alabama, a bomb exploded in the 16th Street Baptist Church just before a Sunday morning service. 15 people were injured. 4 children were killed.
Things had been so beautiful, and now it was worse than normal. The day of the funeral of 3 of the girls in Birmingham, a VW bus, load of us, came from Tougaloo, Mississippi, near Jackson, over to Birmingham and for their funerals. And our first stop was the 16th Street Baptist Church, just to see it. to try to understand. And we walked around looking at things, picking up the glass and the shotgun shell casings and thinking about it. And then we went on where the services were held. The husband of the driver of the van was the only photographer in the church, with permission, back of the organ pipes. And the rest of us, along with, I would say, thousands of other people, were clustered in the streets listening to the services, and we could hear the prayers and Dr. King giving the eulogy. We were there just in tears and trying to keep strong.
I'm going to move ahead, by the way, to John Lewis in Selma, Alabama. So if we can move to that piece of video. That was 2 years later, the march in Selma. Let's play that one.
I can never forget Selma. Selma, in a sense, was one of the finest hours in the history of the civil rights movement. When we arrived at the apex of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama state troopers. About 600 of us walking in twos. It was a very peaceful, orderly protest.
That night will not fit.
Well, I had no idea that we would be beaten, that we would be trampled or tear gas. I thought we all would be arrested and jailed. But you come to that point, and I think it's very much in keeping with the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence, that in spite of the fears, the misgivings, or the reservations you may have, you tend to lose that sense of fear, and you keep your eyes on the prize.
There's both in Alabama, Birmingham, and Selma.
Well, again, what you have to understand is, and I think you have a clip of President Johnson speaking to this, you understand that the pressure is growing. And the pressure is growing. We talked earlier briefly about media. And the pressure is growing in part because what happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge becomes known as Bloody Sunday. And you had Charlton Heston on TV. They interrupt the showing of this amazing Exodus movie with all of its religious power for news breaks of video coming from the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And they're showing people, again, in the same spirit that I come here tonight, oh my God, the whole history of people being abused, treated as inferiors, even animals, is not something just to go back to what was going on with people trying to escape oppression in the days of the Bible. But here it is right now in America. This is tremendous power. And it ends up on the front pages. And then, you know, this was the time of the birth of TV in America, this 1950s, early 60s period. And the man identified as the messenger, the TV personality for the civil rights movement was Dr. King. But you'll notice Dr. King is not on the Edmund Pettus Bridge when that confrontation takes place. But then he comes to support the continuation of the march, and with him he brings the TV cameras in massive numbers. So now what has happened in the flash, even as it interrupted Sunday night television, the most watched night of television to this day in America, now becomes a constant, and people from around the country flock to join the march from Selma to the state capital, Montgomery, again, to protest efforts to suppress the black vote in the state of Mississippi.
So pause on that note to understand the mindset of what was going on. George Wallace, of course, was a key player in all of this. So just a week or a week and a half after Selma, he was on CBS News explaining, defending. These are his words. Let's watch.
The matter of lending support to peaceful assembly, I have always stated 100 or more times in this country and other states of the Union, when asked about what do you think about the pickets that are picketing you, I said pickets have a right to picket. Peaceful picketing is part of the American system. Peaceful demonstrations are part of the American system. Freedom of speech is part of the American system, but as the president himself said, it doesn't give you the right to go into a crowded theater and holler fire. So the people of Selma, Alabama have had 8 weeks of almost continuous demonstrations, and therefore I think that when demonstrations begin to get to the point that they interfere with the rights of others, that in my judgment they cease to become peaceful. And I might point out that many peaceful demonstrations by Negro citizens of this state have been carried on throughout Alabama. There have been many in the last week, but I do think, and we have lent support to them in that we have had even policemen there to see that no one got hurt in the demonstrations. So we are for peaceful demonstrations, but we don't think that peaceful demonstrations should run 8 long weeks. I wonder how long the people of New York would put up with 8 weeks of demonstrations in Times Square, in the Boston Commons, in the city of Philadelphia, when in the demonstrations in Pennsylvania Avenue just 2 days ago, they were allowed to sit down for only 30 minutes, whereas here in the capital of Alabama, they sat down and blocked the main thoroughfare for 11.5 hours.
You write about where we are today. Quote, Donald Trump's Make America Great Again theme succeeded as an emotional trigger, a trigger stirring rage in people. As you hear Governor George Wallace, are there echoes of what we're hearing today from the MAGA movement?
I think absolutely. You know, there are 2 things to say on this. One is, remember, what they're protesting for is voting rights. Voting rights. Fast forward to this moment. Huge political battle over redistricting, mid-decade redistricting, intended to increase the congressional districts in the country that are not only majority white, but majority Republican, to assure that there will be more Republican seats in the House of Representatives. This has tremendous racial consequence. You could lose any number. I think people think about 12 seats now held by blacks in Congress. Jim Clyburn, for example, is from South Carolina. You may know his name. He played such a key role in terms of President Biden's election. Think about these demographics for a second. Blacks make up about 23% of the population of South Carolina, but 83% of the congressional districts are white. There's only one black member of Congress from the state of South Carolina, Jim Clyburn. And then you start thinking about Alabama, Louisiana. Again, large black populations, disproportionate white representation in terms of their congressional delegations. So this is very much connected to this moment in terms of Trump and the Republicans. The Republican Party is still, even as people talk about the increased support that Trump got in 24 from black men and Latinos, the Republican Party is still more than 80% a white party. And it's difficult for people. One of the things that people who read my book come back to me about is they say, I think you got a mistake in here. You better check this. And I say, what is that? And I know what's coming. They say, you know, you've written here that no Democrat has won the majority of the white vote for the presidency since 1964, Lyndon Johnson. And I say, you better go check your facts, because that's exactly right. This is a very upsetting reality because, sometimes discussions about race can make people uncomfortable, prickly, sensitive. They don't, we'd rather not get involved in something that has such a potency, but it's a fact. It's a reality. And I think it's a reality that President Trump uses to his political advantage. Let me just finish up on this. Sure. Because it's not just, the George Wallace type of voter suppression in this regard. You think about what's going on with immigrants, with ICE, with the use of the National Guard in big cities, big democratic cities with large Black and Latino populations. And it again touches on the whole issue of crime, who is hassled, harassed, brutalized by police, who's incarcerated. And you stop and you think, wait a second, something different is happening in a second civil rights movement. And again, this book was written to say, let's be aware of the power of this moment. And the final thought I have on this is, when you see Wallace speak about, it's not fair to the white people in Selma to have these folks marching around and complaining and being sort of whining in the streets when they're just trying to lead their lives. Maybe they could picket and go home and stop, but no, these people keep coming back, and we have a lot of these, what he called northern agitators, because some of the young people were coming down to join in the protest. You have to understand that he was saying to the white population of Selma at the time that we can come together. Our identity, who we are, is in opposition to these interlopers who are coming in here and trying to disrupt our culture and our traditions. And then you fast forward to this moment, and I'll say two things. I think of the argument over Confederate monuments, and if you recall, Charlottesville, and the whole idea that Jews will not replace us, which was being chanted by the people who had come supposedly to defend the Confederate statues in Charlottesville. But you also think about the idea that they believe that there is a replacement going on, being funded by the Jews to bring in the immigrants, to promote the blacks, to replace the whites. And you think, wow, that's a wild, do people really believe this stuff? Is this on the podcast? Is this being pushed on the internet? And you say, oh my gosh, it's hard to believe that that's what's going on. But you have to open your eyes. And part of this, finally, Steve, is that I think being white in America is so different today than being white in America back when it was a 90% white country. When I talk about the second civil rights movement, I think something that makes black people uncomfortable is I say, you know who marched in 2020 in the Black Lives Matter marches that were the biggest marches in the history of this country? We recently had the No Kings March, which I think set a one-day record. But if you stop and look overall, the biggest protest movement ever in American history took place in your lifetime, my lifetime, and that was Black Lives Matter. 26 million people, not only here in the United States, but you could have been in Paris, London, Buenos Aires. An incredible movement. And I think when you stop and think about the fact that about 2/3 of the people marching were white, you say, wait a second. Being white in America is not necessarily being opposed to black people, opposed to the immigrants, to the Latinos, the Asians, to the young people coming up with different ideas. No, in fact, it seems that there is a presence of white people that President Trump and others find threatening, because these white people are not agreeing that their identity is locked in to being unwelcoming to people who have been positioned as the other or the threat or the danger or the criminal. I think so much power is right now at risk in terms of identity. And I think that's why you hear these racially loaded topics being raised in order to gain political advantage.
So I'm going to ask you an impossible question. I'm going to leave you with the words of Dr. Martin Luther King, his final speech, just moments before he was killed in Memphis, Tennessee, 1968. But my question for you, Juan, is how he would view this second civil rights movement and what leadership role he would play. But let me share with you and with you his final public speech. Dr. King.
We've got some difficulties ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. Why don't I? Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over. And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know the names. And we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. My eyes have seen the glory of the kingdom of the Lord.
I mean, just as I look at that again and knowing, of course, moments later he would be assassinated.
Wow, I'm just sitting here watching and I'm enthralled. It's amazing. It was a singular life and a singular voice in terms of American history. Because, even as I'm talking about a first movement and a second movement, we can go back. Obviously, we've had a civil war in this country. Some people say it wasn't about slavery. If you buy that one, I got a bridge to sell you. But then you come forward and you go through the Reconstruction period and the failures of Reconstruction. And then you come forward from that and you are into, the great struggles about segregation and about the laws, and that leads to the moment of Brown v. Board, Rosa Parks, Emmett Till, Freedom Rides, and the passage of the Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act.
And so if you were here today viewing this second civil rights movement, and again, the battle that you're really dealing with, trying to deal with police brutality and violence against Black men and all that you've talked about the last hour, how would he view it today, do you think?
Well, it's hard to, what a unique voice. And someone so strongly rooted in the church, someone who brought, I think, with him the moral argument to the fore. So often right now what we're talking about is political arguments, and we're talking about a different era of Black leadership in the country. Even if you look at someone, and I think hopefully Jesse Jackson recovers, but I think as people look at the Jesse Jackson era, what you're going to hear about is Jackson as the man who was there when King was assassinated. He then has blood on him. He goes on TV and he tries to inherit that mantle. And what does he do? He becomes a politician. He runs for the presidency. He has campaigns that, to me, looked like civil rights rallies. And he is the continuation in terms of not only political, but economic development as a new phase of the civil rights, the first civil rights movement. The difference is that Barack Obama comes on the scene, and he's not from the South. He's not from the black church. He's not involved with the civil rights era. It's a new type of black leader on the American scene. So when you ask me about Dr. King, I think Dr. King would understand. He knew the Jesse Jacksons. He might have had trouble with Jesse Jackson becoming so political. If you recall famously, Dr. King bringing the moral argument offended his allies, including the likes of President Johnson, by opposing the Vietnam War. People said, that's not your job. Your job is civil rights and black rights. And here he is saying, no, this war is immoral, and I don't care about the political consequence. I speak truth from the heart. For Jackson and others, they were making political deals, economic deals. Then you get someone who is in office at the paramount of power, Obama, and you have black people saying to him, we thought there was going to be a black president. He was going to solve a lot of these black problems. He was going to be the black president. And he's saying, no, I'm not the black president. I'm the president of the United States of America. I'm everybody's president. And they're disappointed with him. And you have black people who think that Obama failed them. So there's so many angles to this moment in American history. And if Dr. King comes, he would have to see through. You would be asking him, well, what do you think about Jesse Jackson? What do you think about Al Sharpton? What do you think about the election of Obama? What do you think about the backlash to Obama in terms of Donald Trump? And then what do you think about the emergence of Black Lives Matter and the fact that Black Lives Matter said, we don't want to be a movement like Dr. King's. In fact, we don't want this all-male leadership. We want black women in the leadership position, and we want to welcome gay people into leadership. He would have, I think, you know what? He might be shocked to silence. He might not know what to say.
Well, let me have Barack Obama respond to what you just said, based on an interview that Lester Holt conducted in 2017, because exactly what you pointed out, he was asked about. This runs about a minute and a half. Let's watch.
I think any talk of it being a post-racial America after my election was never realistic. I think it was.
But that was a lot of that talk, though.
Well, I think, in fact, that talk was not only naive, but I think created some problems down the road, because two things happened. Number one, it meant that African Americans and other minority groups might have felt as if the problems that had built up over centuries, a wealth gap, an education gap, significant poverty, that those things could be addressed overnight. On the other hand, among, I think, some white voters who sincerely were glad to see that the country had made this breakthrough, there was also maybe an unrealistic notion that somehow, okay, that means discrimination's over.
But is there a third group that just didn't want a black president?
Well, undoubtedly so. There's no doubt about that. But in the same way that you wouldn't expect in a 4-year span or an 8-year span to undo the entire legacy of race in America, social attitudes also don't transform in 4 years or 8 years. It happens over generations. And so, sure, there is residual racial prejudice in this society.
And I know you don't believe that we're more divided racially today. And historically, you're right. There are some historic markers that would suggest otherwise.
Pretty strong ones.
Yeah, there's some pretty strong ones. but the fact is, I think a lot of people looked at you and said, this is the guy that's going to make those arguments about inequality. He's going to use this platform. I think any of us African Americans who work in business or prominent roles feel this struggle. Am I being black enough? Am I too black? Am I not black? You know what I'm talking about?
I think everybody wrestles with the fact that we are Americans, And we take great pride in this country that has given us so many blessings, and the fact that because of the color of our skin, we are bound to a history that has often been cruel.
You know the struggle I'm talking about.
And so the way I have always resolved this, and I talk to my daughters about this, is that my starting point is not to assume the worst in others, but assume the best.
3 days later, Barack Obama leaves the White House and Donald Trump becomes president for the first time. Your thoughts?
Well, I really identify not only with Obama's comments, but with Lester Holt's questions. Because I think what you see there is a sense that, this country is changed. There's no question that this country, in terms of racial opportunity and racial justice, is hugely better than the country, let's say, that existed when Obama was born in 1961. There's just no question. And he's saying that to his daughters. You can talk about racial disadvantage and continuing discrimination, but never lose sight of the idea that there is forward progress. In fact, huge forward progress. And never lose faith in the idea of the American pledge, the American idea that all men are created equal and that we are striving constantly to live up to that ideal. This is inspiring stuff. But as he said, to think that he was going to, in 4 years or 8 years, unravel that huge ball of myths that is American race relations, I don't know, he said naive, but it's not real. It's that would have been like, you want to have the I Love Lucy story end in half an hour, right? Because that's how you like to watch TV. Everything is resolved in half an hour. It's not like that. We are living through a tremendous epic in terms of American history, and part of that is a new era of race relations.
All of that is in this book. And again, a book signing and sale afterwards, right over there. Questions from the audience. We'll make this lightning round. How can we tell if this second civil rights movement is making progress?
Well, I get, this is really interesting because, again, going back to the politics and people who say to me quite frequently, Juan, how do you explain the idea that more black men voted for Trump in 24 than ever before, or that half of Latino men voted for Trump? And I say, I think there are lots of young people of color, but especially young men of color, who are frustrated with lack of progress as they see it when you think about job opportunities, education, troubled schools and the like, when you talk about, relationships with the police, with the power structure, that they just were like, I just want to get even. I just want to tear the thing down. I don't care what they're going to say or who they tell me to vote for. I think there's a lot, and also, a lot of people identifying with the kind of gangster attitude reflected in Trump's persona, all the women and the gold everywhere and the big buildings and the bragging about his wealth. But to me, what you're seeing in this moment is really a transformation in which you have that kind of frustration boil up and then boil over. And as it boils over, I think then you see people coming to understand that, wait a second, we now have the first black woman on the Supreme Court in the aftermath of Black Lives Matter. Oh, that's a huge change. A huge change when you consider that, one, we've never had a black woman on the court, and second, that the other black person on the court appointed by a Republican is one of the most conservative voices on the court. Secondly, I would say, look at the Congress. This is the most racially diverse Congress in the history of the United States, the 118th Congress that was seated in 23. And not only that, there are more women in this Congress than we've ever seen. And then you stop and start looking at some of the statistics, and I think you saw this a little bit in the conversation between Lester Holt and President Obama, where Lester Holt said, yeah, there have been changes, and Obama very quickly says, major changes. So let's think, you start thinking about educational achievement. You think about the size of the middle class, Black, Latino, Asian in this country. You start thinking about participation in the United States military and the roles being played by people. I mean, you know, I think in all of our lifetimes, I think that would be right, even for students here at Gannett, that we had Colin Powell. I mean, these are major moments. So you have to understand, again, tremendous progress, even as we continue to feel the sting, maybe it's more than sting, maybe we feel the piercing in terms of the difficulty of discussions about race in America.
Is Kyra here? Kyra Taylor? Where is she? Can you come up here? I want to do this question justice. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd be honored if you could come up here on the stage. And welcome. First of all, tell these folks what you do.
So I'm the executive director of Erie's Black Wall Street. It is an organization here to make Erie a more equitable place for Black people to live and for Black people to thrive. We focus on homeownership, economic development, and community development within the Black community.
Yes. What is remarkable is this organization is homegrown. It's not like somebody's going to come in and solve the problems. You're an Erie resident making a difference in your community. And I want you to ask the question, not me, because I think you'll do it far better than I could. So you sit down here.
You play Steve Scully.
Can I have my question? Just make sure I don't miss it. Okay, so my question is, how can someone who is currently doing this work, especially those with small children and families, safeguard themselves against targeted personal attacks? And how do we not let our own anger and frustration take over?
Wow. Well, there's no safeguarding you as a person from the kind of venom that exists on the internet, for sure. I think the internet is just a sewer on so many levels and so damaging, but there's so many people who can now anonymously attack people like you, people like me, like Mr. Scully for having me here, for whatever. If they have a racial grudge to play and they can do it online, it's going to happen. Secondly, I think, as you've heard discussed here tonight, there are political advantages to demonizing you as causing trouble by raising issues of race, even as you're trying to heal, even as you're trying to repair. There are people who would say, why is she doing that? That's identity politics. That's political correctness. Why do we have to support such an effort without thinking, well, wait a second, look at the damage that was done and look at where we are as a society. Why wouldn't we, as a just American democracy, want to do better? And shouldn't we be grateful for her efforts at helping us to do better and helping to bring people into the system rather than have them on the outside cursing the night? Here is an opportunity to heal. But I felt really, like it was personal when you asked, what do you do about people who are attacking you? I'd like to wrap my arms around you, but they probably put me in jail. But I'm saying there's no way to protect you from that. That's just part of being in public life in this moment. As I said to you, the President of the United States has said Black Lives Matter is a hate symbol. A hate symbol. Wow. So if that's the case, it's not just Black people, it's not just Latinos, it's as I said, the 2/3 of people who are marching for Black Lives Matter, they're also then viewed as terrorists supporting a hate movement. And I think maybe you could gain strength from that and find friends and allies, but there's no way to say to you, oh, darling, you're not going to get hurt and you're not going to get cursed out and told that you're the problem.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kyra. I'm now out of a job. I appreciate it very much. Fabulous job. And thank you for the work that you do. A couple more questions. Do you see the USA as a white America versus a black America?
No. And so the funny thing about this is that I've never felt this way. And I think that's why there was such a response to Barack Obama. I think that Barack Obama doesn't feel that way. And I think that there are people, especially, this is what I was trying to touch on when I said I think we have a different kind of white America at play today. And it's something that is a threat to those who have such nostalgia for the way things were. Make America great again could be make America 1950s again for some people. That they are nostalgic for white dominance and the protection of people who would even honor those who wanted to break apart this great country, by having the South secede from the Union. So I've never thought that it's black against white. I think it's us against the forces that would like to separate us. Just as an aside, let me just say, I am so amused when I read that the Russians and the Chinese, in the midst of political campaigns, their number one tool that they use is to appeal to racial anger and racial separation in trying to undermine the American political process. Why is that? Because they see it as the most effective way, the most cost-effective way to divide us. It stops us from being one people.
So based on this, another question from the audience. What do you think of Zohran Mamdani's win in New York City, and what does that tell you about where we are as a country on civil rights?
Well, on civil rights, you'd have to say it's unprecedented. Not only is he African-born, a Muslim, and in his 30s. I mean, it's unprecedented in so many ways, and a breakthrough if you want to look at it from that direction. But I think it speaks to something, once you get beyond the racial static and the religion, the Muslim and all that, and the issues that the Jewish community feels with his use of language and embrace of the Palestinian cause. I think what really has gone on there is you have a lot of young white people who backed Mamdani, who say that they don't see life in the city as welcoming to them. And they're looking for something different. They're looking for somebody who would say, this is not a city that I can afford to live in. I don't think this is a city that is welcoming to me. And I want a New York political structure that's responsive to my needs. That message is very difficult for a lot of people to hear because they get locked into he's this Muslim guy. A lot of Jewish communities concerned about his perspective on the Israel-Palestinian issue. But that's not where the vote came from. The vote came overwhelmingly from younger white people who are concerned about the fact that it's very hard to afford to live and prosper and think about building a future, a family and the like in this country right now.
And it was a record turnout. I'm going to add a local issue here that I hope I explained properly. If I missed something, let me know. July 2nd, here in the city of Erie, an unarmed black man was killed by his parole officer, his parole agent. His friends and family still are protesting, asking for his killer's name to be released and to receive justice. What can a city like Erie, a community, do to support families of victims like this type of case?
Well, I don't know the details at all.
Did I get that right? Did I miss anything? Okay, yeah.
Well, I think transparency is the key here, because I think if the feeling is that, the truth isn't coming out, there's secrets, something's being hidden, it's eventually going to come out. But at the time that it takes to come out, then all sorts of bitterness, rumors, gossip, you can imagine, And it, again, acts to divide. A community that's strong is a community that says, here's the truth, and we have to deal with it. We don't know. I don't know what happened. I don't know what would have prompted this. I don't know the story. But that story should not be allowed to fester and, like, that swollen body of Emmett Till be about to explode in the Tallahatchie River. You got to stop it.
So let me conclude with the words of Dr. King, who was the leader in the nonviolent civil rights movement, and of course one of his successors, the great John Lewis, who I had the chance to meet and interview on a number of occasions. I just want to share with you, this is a moment in 2016. He was on with Stephen Colbert. It was not a humorous moment, but he was trying to explain why he came up with the term good trouble. And I want to show this because I want to ask you, as we move into potentially a third civil rights movement aimed at LGBTQ and other communities, how you think that should be addressed. So let's watch this and get your final thoughts.
Sometimes we have to find a way to get in the way, or get in trouble. Good trouble, necessary trouble.
Now that is actually something you were talking about at the time, and was the hashtag associated with this sit-in, which was after the tragic shootings in Orlando. Was good trouble. What do you mean good trouble?
Well, when I was growing up in rural Alabama as a young child, and would visit places like Troy and Montgomery, and I would see those signs that said white men, colored men, white women, white waiting, colored waiting. I would ask my mother and my father, my grandparents and my great-grandparents. They would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way. Don't get in trouble. But I heard of Rosa Parks. I heard of Martin Luther King Jr. I met Rosa Parks in 1957 when I was 17. 1958, I met Dr. King. And these two individuals inspired me to get in trouble. And I've been getting in good trouble, necessary trouble ever since.
Really, over the last 70 years, we talked about Emmett Till. We're now in 2025, and there is the second civil rights movement, potentially a third. So walk us through this arc of history and the challenges and opportunities moving forward.
Well, I think the biggest challenge at the moment is defying the forces of division that would take us backwards, that would delay us in terms of forward movement. And I think, that saying about, the arc of history, I think we are on the arc of history and it's going forward, but there is a backlash, and the backlash is real. And yes, Obama was forward movement in terms of racial history, but also, I think also American history. And yet you get someone who says, oh, I'm going to start a birther movement and say that he's not an American. He doesn't belong here. He doesn't legitimately occupy the office of the presidency. And I think that he's a fraud. And this person then becomes president of the United States. And you say, oh, so in other words, the arc of history is moving forward, but it's times it might go to the side, and at times it might go down a little bit, and you might start to think, oh my gosh, it's not progressing. But you have to believe that we can, in fact, reverse those declines, because you and I believe in the arc of history. And at this moment, I think you see a lot of, especially in this off-year election, in terms of what happened, you see a lot of the Black and Latino vote come out aggressively for Democrats, for women, for a Muslim in New York, in a way that we would say that was different. A year ago, it was for Trump. The difference, I think, is that the activist energy, so critical of Obama, as Obama himself said, now realizes you've got to be able to win elections. If you can't hold the political stage, you are giving up something. You may say, oh, well, I wish Hillary had been more aggressive. I wish Kamala Harris, the first Black vice president, first woman vice, I wish she had said this or done that. You say, yeah, you're fine with all your complaints. but you lost the election. You handed power to the backlash. The challenge now going forward, I think, is for that activist base, even if they have legitimate complaints and concerns, to say, yes, but it has to be an effective device in terms of the political goal of winning elections. I think that's where we are.
Tomorrow, Larry Sabato will be here at JES to talk about winning elections, looking ahead at 2026. We will take a break. Happy Thanksgiving, December the 4th. Henry Louis Gates coming to Erie at the Water Theater. We hope you join us for that. Next year, we'll have the Pope coming. I want to thank all of you for being with us tonight. You've been a great audience, and a sincere thanks to Juan Williams. Fabulous job.
Thank you, Steve.
The book sale, the book signing next door. Please join us for that. Thank you. Kyra, thank you for your question. We appreciate it. Have a great night.